Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. It's been a while since uploading anything to this YouTube channel here, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to edit some select photos from a recent photo shoot, and in that way hopefully give you some value and some insight into the creative behind the scenes and the editing process of the photos. So this collection of photos is just a very small collection from a recent shoot that I did. And these are just a couple of my select favorites. These might not even be select favorites to deliver to the client necessarily, but just more so some personal ones that showed a lot of fun and emotion and character in the photos. For this shoot, I was looking for a very sort of summery and fun feel, which was direction from the client. So hopefully that translates in the end result and they get good value out of these photos. So without further ado, let's just get into the editing phase. All right, so we've opened up Lightroom here. Let's go ahead and jump into the first photo. As I said, I've only selected like 5 images here. These are just the selects that I thought I'd go through and edit. By the way, I'm just gonna come in here to the exposure. Just play around a little bit. I was shooting all these photos on my Canon 5D Mark IV, and most of them are on a 24 to 70mm lens. I believe all these selects here are on a 24 to 70mm lens, and the only other photos I shot a couple of wide angle photos, but yeah, mostly just kept it on this nice and versatile lens. So just gonna start off with the crop here. It's always a good idea, get the crop going. Oh yeah, and on the crop preview, you can cycle through different sort of overlays to show you different cropping methods. You can cycle through those with the O key, just tap in the O key. Or if you want to alternate the different, like the different direction of the spiral, for instance, the golden spiral, you can hold Shift and then click O. Yeah, so that pretty much works on any photo. Obviously, that's just gonna give you like different compositional options. So let's go back to this one. And I'm actually gonna use the golden spiral on this one because I kind of like the way it has a nice flow to it. I am gonna open it up a little bit more, go to the unlock tool, just so we're not cropping in on her hand there. If it was like the perfect golden spiral of composition, all of this would be kind of empty, I suppose, or something would be running along that shape and then into a sort of subject here, which is predominantly the shoe. It's for a shoe company, so the focus sort of has to be on the shoes. And so even with the bounce, for instance, I had my friend Angus holding the bounce for me and giving a good reflection of light onto the shoes and adding a little bit more, a little bit more fill light. So coming in here to the basic settings, just gonna up the contrast a little bit, down the exposure, down the highlights rather, down the whites, up the shadows a tiny bit, play around with that. Texture, I'm gonna leave clarity, I'm gonna leave all of these are looking okay. Saturation, I'm gonna bring down a tiny bit and vibrance up. I don't know why, I just tend to bring the vibrance up a tiny bit and the saturation. The reason for that is saturation affects, as you can see, a lot. And if you wanna calibrate your eyes for color when you're editing, it's a good idea to drag the saturation to 100 and then 0, and then look at both for a little while, and then hopefully your eye will be somewhat calibrated to color. So in saying that, I think saturation is quite heavy-handed, whereas the vibrance, it's a more subtle version, in my opinion. And so I usually keep the vibrance much the same or up it a tiny bit and always take a couple of notches just off the saturation. Gonna come in here to the curves. I always like to build a little S curve and just slightly clip my highlights like that. and usually fade the blacks a tiny bit. So again, I'm gonna come in here to exposure, just up the exposure a little bit. Gonna up the warmth a little bit more too. Let's have a look at that. It's looking pretty good. It's looking pretty good. So I try not to spend too much time, especially because these might not be selects that I even give to the client. So the idea is not to spend a lot of time in here. And in general, the editing phase, you want to be shooting more than editing. So you can play around for days just on like a crop, for instance, but we're not going to do that here. Now, because this is the focus of the shoot was the shoes, I'm going to go in here to the brush tool, select a sort of medium brush, get rid of that, what I did there, and click the O key. That gives you a outline of what you're doing on the brush. Gives you like this red overlay. Just go nice and roughly. And because I have auto mask selected, it's a little tick box here, auto mask on, it's doing a pretty good job of like masking the shoe. Again, click the O key, get rid of that overlay. And just gonna bring up the exposure a tiny bit. Yeah, highlights a little bit, and then sharpness a little bit as well. So we hopefully make that shoe just pop out a little bit more while still being kind of subtle. So in terms of the color grading, I'm gonna have a look here in terms of all the colors. The highlights, I know I want more on this orange side over here, and just bring the saturation down from that color that I've selected by just clicking and dragging. Usually do like 11 for the highlights, nothing over like 20 usually, otherwise it just gets a little bit too obvious in terms of all this color grading. Like look at that at 100%, it just looks way too obvious. So I'm gonna go in here to the complementary color on this color wheel, which is usually the opposite. So we've got this nice orange over here, and I want this cool sort of deep blue in the shadows. So bringing the saturation down. So while you're doing this though, you always want to look at what the scene actually matches. So usually if it's a nice golden bit of light, you want to accentuate that by adding like orange or yellow into the highlights, and usually a complementary teal or blue into the shadows. That way it makes sense, because I find sometimes it can look a little bit odd if you're adding a cool color to where the sun is shining from. It can kind of almost work against your eye, if that makes sense, because what you see it as is kind of this sunlight, these warm colors coming in, and then shadows are usually always a cool color. If you look at like the side of a mountain or something like that, the shadows that fall in the, the shape of the mountain will usually be like a cool tint color, if that makes sense. Drop me a comment if it doesn't, and I'll explain further, hopefully. So yeah, just getting back to the shadows here, just gonna go a saturation of 10 from here, and then midtones. I do want it slightly warmer. So I'm gonna come in here, select a nice warm yellow that I like, and just bring that saturation down so it's a bit more subtle. It's looking not too bad. I'm gonna go in here and bring the overall color temperature up a little bit on the warmth. Profile corrections. Let's see what that's doing. Yeah, okay, so it's just changing the distortion a little bit and a little bit less vignetting. So I like kind of like halfway what the lens already was doing. And I think that's actually looking pretty good without spending too much time. I'm gonna come back in here into the tone curve, and just bring down those shadows a little bit more and bring up the mid-tones a tiny bit more. Seeing before and after. Yeah, much more life in it. All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy all those settings except for the local adjustments that I did. And even though it's a completely different scene, I'm just gonna paste it here just to see what it looks like. Okay, so it's subtle enough to where it's not offensive, which is good. that's a sign of a good good preset or a good amount of settings is, yeah, if you paste it on a completely different scene or photo and it looks okay, then we're doing good things. Just notice for a second here, just gonna come in here and change the tint a little bit more towards the magenta side. Yeah, again, these are all like not final, and I might still go over these completely again and redo them before I actually deliver them, but it's a good start. So I'm gonna go ahead and crop this one in. This is a good example of golden ratio, the spiral ratio coming in because it's all empty, and it comes into our subject here, the shoes, or what the subject should be of the photo. I'm gonna go ahead and crop it. Just make it a little bit wider. And there, I like the way, if we go into the thirds, oh, we're past it. This kind of third is pretty much empty. I like that, the way that's weighted in the photo. So yeah, I actually really like how it's just coming here. I might make it a tiny bit cooler and go into the tone curve again and just bring in a little bit more depth. Yeah, so it's doing quite nice things here. And I might accentuate the light with a gradient filter. Kind of would like to, yeah, just bring up the exposure a tiny bit and the shadows. And then I'll do over here another gradient filter. Okay, coming over here. I don't love how blue this corner of the sky is. I know it's how it was shot, but it's just, sometimes it's a little bit distracting if you got like kind of light sky over here and then sort of this darker blue over here. So I'm just gonna go ahead, select the shadows. I think the shadows should probably adjust it enough. Okay, maybe not. Yeah, just do the exposure. Just up enough to where it, yeah, that's doing good things. Just slightly takes the edge off that blue. Come in here. I know it's kind of like, it's almost like an awkward in-between moment, but some of them personally are my favorites. And it just communicates to me like a kind of a fun moment when it's in between and kind of mid-action, I guess you would call it. Maybe not the perfect marketing photo, but I like it. So I'm gonna come in here with the healing tool on the clone setting, and just clone out some of these tiny little distractions here. And usually Lightroom does a pretty good job. We don't have to go into Photoshop necessarily. If it's a little bit more fiddly, then you find yourself in Photoshop manually editing those kind of stuff, those kind of like little distractions out. For instance, I kind of don't like this like little bit of seaweed here. And these are things like probably no one's ever gonna realize or even notice, or that didn't do a very good job there. Sometimes you gotta come in here and just manually do it. Just gonna make a smaller brush and brush it out and do the heal setting and then drag that there to tell it to sort of grab from that area. I think that's fine. So shadows, I'm gonna bring up a tiny bit more. Maybe bring down the midtones a little bit. Maybe a little bit further. Let's make a nice neutral exposure while still having some character in it. Yeah, I think this is quite nice. I'm gonna bring the whites down a tiny bit. And I'm gonna accentuate this gradient filter as well, from left to right. It's a good idea to have a look over here in your sort of thumbnail navigator view. And I leave that on because it's a great sort of idea just to have a quick overview. Sometimes you can get too bogged down in the nitty-gritty of a photo that you kind of miss the overall feeling of it. And so that helps you see the overall feeling with these gradient sort of filters. All right, moving on to the next photo. I'm gonna do the same because I like what I've done in terms of the tone and the color of this image. So I'm gonna move along here and just see what happens. Oh, okay, not bad. A little bit too green. See what it looks like on the original +6 tint. Yeah, I think that's good. Coming in here, see what the profile corrections did. Okay, not a big deal. I'm gonna go ahead and straighten this up a little bit and crop it in and down. Yeah, I like that tighter feel. Straight off the bat, I think that's pretty nice. And that's that means that we've got our settings right. Might just remove this here. It's a little fly actually. Big fly, I should say. Just a slight visual distraction there. And gotta say thanks to Angus for letting us use these Troopy 75 series and also being the bounce boy. He had a bounce reflector over here somewhere and it was sort of bouncing some light into here through the window. So good job with that, Angus. Helped out heaps of that shoot. Yeah, I think overall I'm really liking this edit. I love the shadows and the colors. The grading is working for me. I might just go in here to the sharpening on the masking, see what the sharpening is actually doing. So if you slide the masking slider on sharpening and hold down the option key, on Mac that is, you'll get a preview of basically what exactly in the image it's sharpening. So less masking, sharpening everything, more masking, it's only sharpening those strong lines. So I usually kind of go around halfway, and then same with the sharpening, around 50, plus 50% sort of thing. So that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and copy that one and paste. Yeah, okay, so this one needs a little bit more brightening up overall and a little bit more life in the shadows and a little bit warmer as well. Bring it to 5,300 Kelvin around that. Gonna go ahead and crop it in, crop it up. Yeah, this is looking really nice. I love again, with the bounce we had, it's bringing a nice sort of golden light, and it was sort of over here somewhere reflecting onto James here. I'm gonna bring down the shadows just a tiny bit more, and then we'll fade the blacks a little bit, just to bring a bit more character. I'm gonna bring up the shadows on the tone curve. Just have a little preview. And I'm gonna bring up the midtones. Off, on, off, on. It's looking pretty good. I'm gonna come in here a little bit more on the warmth. Say 5,400 to be specific on the warmth, I think. And then overall exposure can come down just a smidge. With this sign over here for the beach that we're at, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that because it's quite distracting. Maybe a lot nicer shot without it. So I'm gonna go clone on the brush and then just brush it out, brush it away. And hopefully it does a good job. Yep, perfect. Can't complain about that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Gonna bring the vibrance down a tiny bit. And I think in terms of the color grading, gonna go into the shadows and bring the color grading. I think the blue is just a tiny bit too strong on 10. So I'm gonna take it down to 5. And I think it should be a little bit more subtle. Maybe a little bit too faded compared to the original. Blacks, what are they doing? Yeah, bring them up and I'll probably bring down the shadows. Tiny bit compared to what I had them at. Yeah, it's having like a nice sort of summery feel. And that's really what the brief was. It was to try and communicate this fun, summery sort of moment. And yeah, hopefully we've done that through the editing process. Brought about that kind of like, yeah, that warm sort of fun, vibrant feel. I'm gonna go ahead and crop this one in. Just having a look at our golden ratio again, holding the shift key. See, there's some different options. It's quite good actually. Bring that in. Straightening a little bit. Just going back to rule of thirds. And have a look here. Yeah, liking that. I like the light leak that's happening over here. That's pretty cool. Adds such a nice lifestyle-y sort of feel when you get a good light leak, I reckon. And the color's quite nice, sort of a subtle orange. I'm gonna go ahead. I'll see what it looks like with the pasted settings. Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. Needs a little bit of tweaking though. I think the exposure's a little bit too high. And maybe this, but yeah, I think the vibrance a little bit too high. So try and keep that around the middle. Yeah, I just love the feeling of like the photo, like he's kind of walking up, smiling. You got almost like the feeling of like just about to step onto your friend's boat or something. I don't know, you're just waiting for them to pick you up kind of thing. So I'm actually pretty happy with how that photo is straight out the box. Again, I'm a little bit distracted by the blue over here, and I'm gonna just change that with the exposure and the shadows. Bring up the shadows so it's less obvious. Obviously, it is like the natural way of the sky. If you look sometimes, you know, it's lighter there and darker over there with the setting sun sort of thing, but whatever takes it away, makes it a little bit less distracting, I think is good. These greens are just a tiny bit too on the saturated side for me. So I'm gonna come into the HSL panel, hue, saturation, luminance it stands for. Took me a while to figure that one out. So I'm gonna click on this tool here. That lets you click and drag up and down for the saturation. Well, it's actually showing it's yellow. That's interesting. Oh, it's yellow and green, fair enough. So I'm gonna go ahead in here and just manually slide down the green saturation and the yellow saturation a little bit as well. Not quite as much as, yes, because it was quite a strong green. I think that's, go into the hues, have a play around, see what it looks like. Yeah, so more green and more orange. And I'm just clicking and dragging or sliding on the trackpad of the laptop. So I'm gonna make it slightly more orange and come back to the crop here. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Might just bring it down with unlock. Bring it down a tiny little bit. And do I like the shadows on here? Here's another good example, looking at the thumbnail over here for sort of your wider view of the photo. No, I don't like those. So I'm gonna make it a 5:7, I think. Bring it in just a tiny bit more and maybe give a little bit more sky. Gonna come in here again with a gradient, even though we're having already really nice tones from over here. I just want to brighten up just a smidge, just to accentuate that. It's sort of what's happening. Really like that. It's quite a summery feel. Yeah, I think that will about do. We'll go from beginning to end. And I just hit the S and L key to get this nice clear background. These are like not the final edits, but gives us a good idea of sort of kind of what we're going for in terms of the mood and what we're going to deliver. It's a fun one. All right, that'll do for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found some value in it. And hopefully catch you soon in another episode of me editing a random recent shoot. Catch you guys later.